Phuoc Thu Province, South Vietnam, March 17th, 1966. Just after 3 a.m., when the jungle usually exhaled into its deepest quiet, something felt wrong. Not to most people, the soundscape still pulsed with insects, distant water, and the occasional rustle of night creatures. But to the Viet Cong sentries stationed along the perimeter of their hidden base, something subtle, almost invisible, was off. A faint imbalance. A hush inside the hush. Nguyen Van Am, a veteran of 2 relentless years in the jungle war, trusted that sixth sense more than any rifle. He could smell an American patrol half a kilometer out, the stench of bug spray, the faint chemical burn of M16 lubricant, the sharp scent of their cigarettes, no matter how carefully they cupped the ember. He had listened to Hueys all his life. He could judge altitude from rhythm alone, identify models from the wobble of their blades. He had survived by becoming part of the forest, but tonight the forest felt hollow, as if holding its breath. Still, nothing moved. Nothing obvious. No broken branches. No footfall. No tone of metal brushing metal. So he dismissed it. 10 meters away, his comrade Tam leaned against a tree, half dozing but alert enough to register his next rotation. The clock ticked toward 0342. He inhaled deeply, then turned to nudge Nguyen awake, and a hand he never saw wrapped around his mouth, a thick, gloved palm. An arm from nowhere, and a blade so sharp it parted the night before it parted his throat. Tam died without sound, without a kick, without even understanding who had touched him. Nguyen reacted faster than anyone expected, whipping his rifle up, pivoting toward the blur he thought he saw, but the same hand, the same cold precision, closed on him from the opposite side. He never even got the safety off. Across the perimeter, 2 more sentries were dispatched almost simultaneously, each with the same ghost-like efficiency. No gunshots, no cries, no alarms, and just like that, the most crucial layer of the VC base's safety net vanished. Inside the camp, 18 fighters slept in lean-tos under thick tree cover, their weapons stacked neatly in 2 rows. They never woke. The attack was not loud. It was an operation conducted by people who did not need noise to kill. 4 men slipped through the base like phantoms, each one moving with a fluidity that did not match traditional soldiering. They carried no radios blaring static. They flicked no flashlights. Their boots touched ground with the care of predators studying their prey. They spoke a language through gestures, minute, precise. Practiced 1,000 times in training, the Americans called insanity, but the British and Australians called survival. Explosives were placed on ammo crates. A communications relay was dismantled quietly. 2 VC fighters were killed before they even realized shadows had entered their huts. By the time the timed charges ignited, the attackers had already faded into the dark. A muted eruption tore through the stores of rifles, grenades, and mortar rounds. Flames swallowed the bamboo frames. Smoke rose in a swift column before dispersing under the weight of the triple canopy above. The entire operation lasted under 12 minutes. At 040 hours, the base ceased to exist, but it was the aftermath that truly rattled VC command. When the sun rose, surviving local units found the bodies laid not in chaos, but in a deliberate pattern, placed with intention, positioned like a message written without ink. Not torture, not brutality, just a cold, calculated arrangement that said, we were here. We saw everything, and you never saw us. To the Americans, this looked like a special forces signature. To the Greeks or the British, it resembled psychological warfare refined into art. To the Viet Cong, it felt like something else entirely, as though the jungle itself had begun to fight against them, and they were right. This wasn't an American operation at all. This was the first quiet footprint of the Australian SAS in Vietnam. The ghosts, as they would soon be called by terrified VC scouts. In Hanoi, panic spread faster than analysis. Reports described unknown foreign troops operating with a skill set unlike anything the NVA intelligence division had cataloged. These weren't Rambo-style American commandos relying on brute strength and overwhelming firepower. These weren't helicopter-borne infantry leaving soundtracks in the sky. These men hunted like the Viet Cong hunted, moved like the Viet Cong moved, survived like the Viet Cong survived, but with discipline, training, and precision far beyond militia forces. For the first time, the VC faced enemies who fought the way they themselves did, but better. American patrols stomped through the jungle in platoons, guided by radios, artillery, choppers, and confidence in their overwhelming fire superiority. The Australian SAS slipped through foliage with the grace of apex predators, one step at a time. Slow, deliberate, reading the land, following patterns invisible to the untrained. The Americans came to Vietnam with a doctrine. The Australians came with experience, 12 years refining guerrilla warfare in the Malayan emergency, mastering quiet killing, tracking, infiltration, and psychological pressure. As the smoke of the destroyed base drifted upward, the legend of these silent operators began to spread. The Viet Cong had lived for years, believing they were the shadows, the masters of the bush, the untouchable phantoms who dictated the terms of jungle combat. But now, something else moved in the darkness. Something that left no survivors, no witnesses, no clues, only perfectly executed destruction and the sinking realization that the jungle was no longer theirs alone. For the VC fighters, who discovered that first pattern of bodies, one truth settled into their bones. The Australians were here, and the rules had changed. The first light of dawn barely touched the canopy as Captain Reeves raised his binoculars. From the hilltop ledge, all he could see was green, an endless, suffocating blanket of razor-sharp palms, twisted vines, and a darkness so dense it felt alive. The Australians used to joke that the Vietnam jungle wasn't terrain. It was a personality, one that listened, one that decided who walked out alive. Today, that jungle was hiding a Viet Cong Battalion, nearly 300 fighters, dug in among tunnels, camouflaged trenches, and tripwire corridors that made the earth itself a weapon. Reeves lowered the binoculars. "All right, boys. This place is a maze. They think we won't step into it?" Corporal Mason smirked. "Then let's disappoint them." But nothing about this mission was simple. Their orders were clear. Find the VC headquarters, disrupt their supply chain, and force the battalion to abandon the entire sector. Yet intelligence warned that this area, codenamed the Serpent's Spine, was one of the most heavily trapped kill zones in Phuoc Thu province. Aussie patrols avoided it. American units called it Death Country. But today, 10 Australian commandos were going in. The first W9G barely 10 minutes into the jungle. Sergeant Rourke raised a fist. Everyone froze. Mason crouched beside him. "What have we got?" Rourke pointed to a cluster of leaves. They looked ordinary until he carefully brushed aside the soil beneath. A pressure plate the size of a cigarette pack, wired to a mortar shell buried under the ground. If they had stepped on it, the explosion would have echoed for kilometers. Reeves whispered, "That's the third one already. They want to funnel us somewhere, and that's exactly why we won't go where they want," Rourke replied. The team rerouted deeper into vegetation so thicket scrapes skimmed through uniform sleeves. The floor was a trap museum, spiked foot pits, bamboo whips, deadfall logs, punji dens. Every step felt like the jungle was negotiating with them, testing whether they had the right to be there. But the deeper they went, the quieter it became. Too quiet. Reeves picked up on it first. The bird stopped. Everyone went still. Mason whispered, "That means movement. Human movement." The silence pressed against their ears like a warning neither one wanted to hear. The Suche does, Rourke signaled with a raised palm. Halt. He knelt, studying the ground. A fresh track. 2 men, light footprints, moving fast. Viet Cong scouts. Reeves knew what that meant. They were being shadowed. All right, boys, he said softly. They know we're here. But instead of panic, something else flickered across the faces of the Australians. Determination. This was their world. They thrived when hunted. Reeves made a decision in seconds. We'll leave them where we want. He pointed toward a narrow ribbon of ground, running between 2 massive trees. This path looks like the best way through, which means it's the worst. Mason grinned. Bait them? Bait. The squad spread out, moving silently to either side of the path, leaving only 2 men visible. Reeves and Mason walked directly down the center, making just enough noise to ensure the scouts wouldn't lose them. Every few seconds, Reeves glanced over his shoulder, nothing but leaves shifting, and then a faint glint. Metal, a rifle barrel. Reeves didn't turn his head. He didn't speak. He just kept moving. The scouts followed them exactly as expected. Low, silent, confident dot at the end of the false path. Reeves paused near a marked tree. To the untrained eye, it looked like any other trunk. But above the bark, a fist-sized rock rested in a notch. Reeves tapped it with his elbow and kept walking. The rock fell. A signal. Instantly, 8 Australians rose from the undergrowth on both sides of the path. Rifles leveled. The Viet Cong scouts froze mid-step, eyes wide, caught in a quiet, flawless Australian snare. Reeves whispered, "Drop him." 2 clicks. 2 shots. 2 bodies collapsed into leaves without a sound. No alarms. No shouts. No echoes. Just the jungle breathing again. The dicey overlay after securing the area. Mason searched the bodies and pulled out something that made everyone look twice. A laminated map. Thick arrows, circles, safety corridors, sir. This is a full layout of the serpent's spine. Reeves' heart sped up. This wasn't scout material. This was battalion-level planning. This gives us their trap clusters, fallback positions, even the command bunker. Mason said, astonished. Reeves exhaled. This changes everything. But before he could say more, Rourke pointed into the brush. We're not alone. The entire jungle ahead shifted like something massive was moving. Leaves trembled. Birds burst upward in a chaotic cloud. And then the sound hit them. Footsteps, many fast, not scouts. Not a patrol. A full Viet Cong advance element, and by the noise, at least 40 fighters. Reeves knew the jungle well enough to recognize the pattern. The battalion hadn't just detected the scout's silence. They had responded. Boys, Reeves whispered, they're coming for us. Mason shouldered his rifle. Straight fight? Reeves smirked. Not today. The phantom pate etched using the stolen map. Reeves traced a finger along a thin, unmarked line, almost invisible among the symbols. A tunnel ventilation corridor. Follow me. Single file. Keep your spacing. The Australians melted into foliage, moving fast but silently, weaving into a narrow path that even the VC rarely used. The jungle closed over them so tightly that daylight vanished, turning the world into a passage of vines and shadow. Behind them, the VC hit the booby trap path the scouts had taken. A sharp explosion cracked the air. Then another. Then screaming, the VC had triggered their own traps. Reeves didn't look back. He just whispered, "Jungle's playing for our side today." They pushed deeper until the sounds faded, replaced by a distant hum ventilation shafts, which meant only one thing. They had reached the outer edge of the Viet Cong Battalion's underground fortress. Reeves raised a fist, the squad freezing in place. "Gentlemen," he murmured, Chapter 2 ends here. Tomorrow, we go inside. The air grew colder as the Australians moved deeper along the narrow vine-wrapped corridor. Captain Reeves halted the squad with a raised fist. Ahead of them, half swallowed by roots and mud, lay a shallow depression in the earth, too symmetrical, too smooth to be natural. Corporal Mason crouched next to it, brushing aside the moss, a vent shaft. One of the main breathing tubes for a Viet Cong underground system. Rourke knelt and placed his palm near the opening. Warm, moving air. Confirmed. There's a full tunnel network below us. The men exchanged looks. Tunnels meant one thing. They had reached the outer skin of the battalion's headquarters. Reeves wiped the sweat from his brow. All right, boys. From this point on, they're everywhere. Above us, below us. Listening for every breath. But instead of fear, a strange calm washed over the squad. This was the world Australians had trained for: invisibility in enemy territory. The ghost anti-Rye Mason scanned the area. Sir, there's no exposed hatch. They've buried the entrances. Reeves inspected the vent shaft again, too narrow to enter but wide enough to listen. He leaned over and heard faint echoes, distant chatter, boots scraping clay floors, something metallic being dragged. Boys, Reeves whispered, the battalion's awake. Suddenly, Rourke signaled sharply, a two-finger point toward a cluster of bushes. Movement. Everyone knelt instantly. A Viet Cong runner appeared, slipping silently through foliage, heading straight toward the ventilation shaft. He carried a wooden crate, balanced carefully in his arms. Supplies. Reeves mouthed. Take him quietly. The squad fanned out. Mason and Rourke crept from opposite sides, timing their steps with the rustle of leaves. As the runner knelt to check the vent, Mason's arm hooked around his neck while Rourke pressed a hand over his mouth. A short struggle. A muffled gasp. Then silence. The man lay still. Mason opened the crate. Canned rice, bandages, ammunition labeled with Chinese stamps. Sir, Mason whispered. If this runner came alone, then the entrance can't be far. The hidden DOO Rourke searched the ground carefully. His fingers stopped at a patch of soil that felt softer, recently disturbed. He dug with a knife until the metallic edge tapped something hollow, a buried bamboo handle. The squad tensed. Booby trap? Rourke listened. No ticking. No tension wire. Not a trap. He whispered. A door latch. He gently pulled. The earth shifted. A camouflaged panel cracked open with a puff of stale air. A tunnel entrance. Reeves inhaled slowly. All right, boys. Torches dim. Rifles up. Stay low. One by one, the Australians slid inside, descending into the underground world of the Viet Cong, a labyrinth built to withstand bombings, artillery, and entire battalions. The moment they entered, the smell hit them: damp clay, sweat, gun oil, and smoke. This wasn't a hideout. It was a city. The UNDRW passage was barely shoulder width, forcing them into a crouched march. The deeper they went, the louder the world became. Distant footsteps, hushed voices, clattering metal. Torches revealed wall carvings, arrows, numbers, coded symbols marking supply routes. At a fork, Mason whispered. Left goes toward the sound of cooking. Mess hall? Reeves shook his head. Too many eyes. We go right. The right tunnel widened slightly, leading to a series of chambers. The men paused at each one. One room stacked with medical supplies, another filled with crates of ammunition. A communication cell with a Russian-made field radio. Reeves stared at the radio. If we take that out, they're blind. But before he could decide, faint footsteps echoed above, rhythmic, marching. Rourke tilted his head. That's not patrol movement. That's assembly. Reeves felt his pulse quicken. Then the battalion commander is giving orders. The Australians pressed forward until the tunnel opened into a larger cavern. They crouched behind a thick support beam, observing silently. The command say iron before them was a massive chamber lit by oil lamps. Maps were pinned to the clay walls. A dozen officers stood around a table marked with arrows representing Australian movement patterns. Dad at the center was a tall, thin man with sharp features and a red-patterned scarf. The battalion commander, he tapped a wooden stick on the map. His voice carried through the cavern. Rourke translated in a whisper. He's ordering a multi-tier ambush. Says the Australians are somewhere north of their perimeter. They're planning to trap us between two companies. Reeves almost smiled. The commander had no idea his entire plan was being overheard. From 10 meters away, then something changed. The commander pointed toward a location deeper. In the cave network, a space circled in red. INKA vault room. He's saying the cache inside must be moved by nightfall. Rourke whispered. Mason frowned. Cache. Reeves narrowed his eyes. Weapons, intelligence, maybe even Chinese advisors. The commander continued speaking, growing harsher. Angrier, Rourke whispered. He says if the Australians get close, they're to collapse the tunnels. That meant burying themselves alive if needed. Reeves clenched his jaw. We need to disrupt the cache before they shift positions. But then Mason's hand snapped to his rifle. Someone was approaching from behind. The narrow, escapia young Viet Cong logistic runner walked toward the cavern entrance, holding a lantern. If he turned the corner, the Australians would be exposed. Mason mouthed silently. Now? Reeves shook his head. Too risky. One body discovered and the entire battalion would collapse the tunnels instantly. He reached into his vest and pulled out a pebble, a tiny object. But enough he flicked it across the chamber. It clattered on the opposite wall. Instantly, the runner spun and moved toward the sound. The Australians slipped deeper into the shadows, brushing past him as he investigated the noise. Every second felt stretched, heavy, dangerous. The squad backed into a narrow corridor leading away from the main cavern, not a planned route, but the only safe path. The secret storage ROM, the corridor sloped downward until the air grew stale. Mason held up his torch and froze. They stood in front of a wooden barricade covered with chains, a storage chamber. Reeves quietly removed the chains and pushed the door. Inside was a sight none of them expected. Dozens of AK rifles wrapped in oilcloth Chinese, RPG launchers, explosives stacked shoulder high, and folders, thick bundles of documents marked with red stamps. Mason exhaled. Sir, this is the cache. Reeves nodded. And if we take this out, their entire battalion collapses. But something else caught Rourke's eye. Footsteps. Fast. Multiple. They're moving toward the vault, he whispered. We need to decide now. Reeves placed his hand on the detonator pouch he carried. This is where we hit them hardest. He looked at the squad. No turning back after this? Mason grinned. Good. I wasn't planning on leaving quietly anyway. Reeves raised his rifle. Boys. Chapter 3 ends here. Next, we blow the heart out of this jungle fortress. For a moment, the storage chamber felt impossibly still, the kind of silence that came before a storm, before a decision that couldn't be undone. Captain Reeves scanned the stacked crates again. Chinese RPG-2 launchers, Type 56 rifles, mortar tubes, explosive blocks wrapped in wax paper, and at least a dozen wooden boxes marked with red characters. Enough firepower to arm half a regiment. This is their lifeline, Reeves whispered. Cut it, and the entire battalion loses its teeth. Mason nodded, already pulling charges from his pack. Good thing we brought the fireworks. But before they could begin planting, Rourke raised a hand. Footsteps, dozens of them. Marching toward the vault. Reeves exhaled slowly. They're coming to move the weapons. We have minutes, maybe less. The clock is sensories worked in silence, every movement precise and disciplined. Mason set 2 blocks of C4 under the mortar crates. Rourke ran wires across the ammunition boxes, creating a chain detonation. Others reinforced the entry door with sandbags to buy time if the VC burst in. Reeves crouched at the center, arranging 3 charges into a triangle, a demolition pattern designed to collapse the chamber inward. Controlled cave-in, he said. We bury the entire cache without bringing the rest of the tunnels down. Mason grinned. Sir, you're a bloody artist. Reeves didn't smile. Time was bleeding away. A muffled voice echoed down the tunnel, the commander himself, barking instructions. Metal scraped. Boots shuffled. Lantern light flickered across the clay walls. They're right outside. Rourke whispered. Mason clipped the final wire into the detonator unit. We're set. Reeves peered through a crack between the planks of the barricade. Shadows were moving, dozens of them. The VC were literally meters away. We move, he whispered. Now, exit into Viet SAS. Australian slipped out of the chamber and into a narrow auxiliary tunnel. The air turned colder, heavier. The darkness felt thicker here, not just visual, but physical, like it pushed back against each step. Mason whispered behind Reeves, Where does this thing even go? Rourke checked the stolen map. Looks like a maintenance shaft. Barely used. That means safer, but also unstable. Reeves nodded. At least unstable tunnels don't have ambush teams inside. Behind them, the muffled sound of the Viet Cong entering the cache chamber grew louder. Voices rose in confusion. Someone shouted an order. They've discovered it, Mason said. Reeves clutched the detonator. Let's get clear. They moved faster. Clay walls narrowed. Roots dangled like skeletal fingers. Water dripped from the ceiling in cold streams. The tunnel twisted in ways that felt almost deliberate, like a serpent trying to confuse prey. At last, the corridor widened. A dead end. Mason stared. Sir, the map's wrong? Rourke examined the wall. It's not wrong. It's sealed. Reeves pressed his palm against the clay. Thinner, sounded hollow. A blast here could open an exit, he said. Mason hesitated. But it'll echo. They'll know exactly where we are. Reeves checked his watch. They already know we're in their tunnels. The silhouetteless they placed a tiny charge on the weak section of the clay and took cover. Reeves counted down with fingers. 3, 2, 1. A muffled boom shook the dirt. Clay crumbled. A hole opened into an upward sloping passage barely big enough to crawl through. Rourke boosted Mason up first. Move, behind them, shouts echoed, furious, urgent. The VC had realized the cache was rigged. Reeves climbed last. The moment he pulled himself up, he heard a chilling sound, metal on metal clicks. Safety's coming off rifles. They're right behind us, Mason whispered. Reeves didn't hesitate. He slammed the detonator switch, a heartbeat of silence. Then a roaring explosion ripped through the tunnels, a shockwave of heat and dust blasting up the corridor. The earth shook like thunder rolled beneath their feet. The lights went out. A wind of burning air pushed through the cracks, snuffing lanterns and filling the passage with grit. The entire cache chamber collapsed, inward, exactly as planned. Behind them, the screams began. Clay walls buckled. Crates detonated. Trapped VC officers shouted orders lost in the chaos. Rourke coughed through the dust. That's it, their headquarters is gone. Reeves didn't look back. Then we moved before the battalion regroups. The lost lava they crawled into was older than the main network, judging by the gnarled roots choking the ceiling and the uneven clay floor. A forgotten maintenance channel. They crawled for nearly 50 meters until the space widened, enough to stand hunched over, Mason wiped mud from his face. Sir, listen. The tunnel vibrated faintly. Not from explosions, from activity, orders, footsteps, dozens of them. Rourke's face hardened. The battalion's moving. They think the collapse was an Australian attack from outside. They're repositioning to launch a counter-assault. Reeves realized what that meant. Every exit was being watched. Every surface tunnel would be guarded. And the jungle above was about to be swarming with fighters, desperately trying to re-establish control. We're trapped between two worlds, Mason said. Underground and surface both hot. Reeves studied the tunnel carefully. Not trapped, he said quietly. Just unwelcome. The tunnel that shouldn't excise Rourke's torch illuminated something strange on the far wall. A slanted wooden beam with strange markings. It wasn't Viet Cong script. It wasn't official, sir. He whispered. This is French. Reeves stepped forward, brushing dust off the beam. Letters appeared. Post 12. Exfil. A remnant of the First Indochina War. A forgotten French. Escape tunnel. Mason stared in disbelief. You're telling me the French built a way out of here 50 years ago? And the VC never found it? Rourke pressed an ear to the wall. No movement behind it. Could be sealed. Could be open. Only one way to know. Reeves nodded. Open it. The men wedged rifles under the loose beams, praying slowly. The clay cracked. A thin draft of fresh, cool air flowed through. Mason's eyes widened. It leads outside. Reeves smiled faintly. Then, gentlemen, this is how we walk out of a battalion's grave. He tightened his grip on his rifle. Chapter 4 ends here. Next. We fight the battalion in the open jungle. Fresh air poured through the cracked French beams like the jungle itself was breathing onto the Australians. Captain Reeves touched the timber again just to believe it wasn't a hallucination, a forgotten escape route buried under decades of mud and war. Fate rarely offered gifts in Vietnam, but today, it had. Mason, you're up, Reeves whispered. The corporal shoved the loosened planks aside, and a thin shaft of daylight cut through the darkness. A hole barely wider than a man's shoulders opened into a slope that angled upward. Rourke checked his rifle. Well, boys, home is that way. But the real world outside wasn't waiting peacefully. The muffled echoes from the tunnel network behind them told the story. A battalion in chaos. Officers shouting conflicting orders. Fighters scrambling to extinguish fires. Runners sprinting through the network, terrified that the collapse was only the beginning. Reeves looked back one last time. That's the sound of a force with its brain cut out. They climbed toward the light. The jungle isn't QE, the Australians. Emerged behind a ridge hidden by thick ferns and elephant ear leaves. Mason crawled forward, binoculars up. Sir, we're behind their outer perimeter. Below them, the Viet Cong Battalion was swarming. Hundreds of fighters, scattered, leaderless, panicking. Some were trying to dig out the collapsed chamber, while others argued over new defensive positions. Supply runners sprinted with crates, unsure where to take them now that their headquarters was buried. Reeves smirked. We didn't just strike them. We blinded them. But the danger wasn't gone. A force this large, even disorganized, was deadly. Rourke pointed to the northeast. Sir, 2 platoons forming up. They're preparing to sweep the jungle. Probably think we'll try to break out north. Reeves' eyes narrowed. They'll sweep every inch of this forest until dusk. Mason asked, so what's our move? Reeves raised 2 fingers. We go south, through the maze. The men stared. The maze, the densest knot of jungle in the sector, filled with traps, natural choke points, and razor-sharp bamboo. A death trap designed by terrain and the VC combined, Mason exhaled. If they avoid it, we use it. Reeves nodded. Exactly. The maze buried ceased. The moment they entered the jungle maze, sound vanished. Sunlight died 5 meters in. The air pressed like a fist around them. Vines hung like ropes, and every tree felt like it had eyes. Rourke kept his machete low, slicing only where necessary. Stay tight. Keep spacing. This place punishes mistakes. A twig snapped behind them. Everyone froze. Mason whispered, "Animal?" Reeves shook his head. Footsteps. The VC had followed their trail. Small teams peeling off from the battalion to hunt them through the maze. Reeves leaned close to Mason. "You remember that thing you said earlier? About disappointing them?" Mason grinned. "Always a pleasure, sir." The jungle turns HUNT. They reached a narrow cut of terrain that dipped into a natural bowl of tangled roots. Reeves scanned it. A perfect ambush site. Not for the VC, for them. Mason, Rourke, positions. They split, vanishing into bush so thick even shapes disappeared. The remaining Australians scattered into staggered firing spots. Minutes passed. Leaves rustled. Then a whisper of movement. A Viet Cong scout slid into view, crouched low, AK raised. 2 more behind him. Their eyes were sharp, hunters who knew the jungle better than most men knew their own homes. But today, they had stepped into the wrong jungle. Reeves let them come. 5 meters. 4, 3, he whispered. "Send them home." A controlled burst cracked the silence. Mason's shot dropped the lead scout. Rourke cut through the second. The third tried to sprint back and tripped into a natural deadfall pit the VC themselves had once dug. No time to celebrate. Shouts erupted deeper in the maze. "They know where we are." Mason called. Reeves didn't flinch. "That's fine, because we're not staying." The escapes are for the next hour. They moved deeper, weaving through natural barriers, crossing creeks, slipping under fallen trunks. The VC chased them, but always a step behind, always hesitating at traps they had built years earlier and forgotten. Rourke checked the map. "Sir, we're close. The Australian outer patrol zone is less than 800 meters away." Mason laughed breathlessly. "Sir, I can practically smell our own folks." But then, gunfire erupted ahead. Not VC fire. Australian fire. Reeves listened carefully. Short, controlled bursts. "That's Delta Company. They're sweeping in from the perimeter." Mason's grin grew. "We're walking into a friendly corridor." Reeves raised a hand, slowing the team. "Stay low. Don't silhouette yourselves." They crawled forward until 2 Australian helmets appeared through the trees. "A patrol." Reeves raised his hand. "Friendly. Hold your fire." One of the patrolmen spun around, eyes wide. "Bloody hell, Captain. We thought you were ghosts." Reeves coughed dust from his throat. "Close enough." Aftermath of a BATLI, ONA Australians escorted Reeves' team back to the forward outpost. Medics checked them over, counting bruises, cuts, and dehydration, but finding no serious injuries. A major approached, shaking his head in disbelief. We heard a massive underground detonation. Battalion Intel says the entire VC command structure north of the river has gone silent. Reeves nodded. "That's because their HQ is no longer on the map." The major blinked. "You boys did that?" Rourke grinned. "Well, with a little help from the French." The major burst into laughter. "You just crippled their operations for months. They'll need weeks to reorganize, if they ever do." Reeves turned toward the maze. Smoke spiraled from somewhere deep inside as the battalion tried in vain to dig out what was already lost. "They won't be coming back," Reeves said quietly. "They can't fight a war without a heartbeat." The end of the maze as the sun dipped, painting the jungle gold. Mason sat beside Reeves. "Sir." Crazy thought. Reeves raised an eyebrow. "Only one?" Mason chuckled. Do you think they ever figured out how we got out? Reeves looked back at the forest, dense, ancient, and silent. No, he finally said. And that's what will keep them awake at night. He stood, brushing dust off his uniform, because the maze didn't beat us. He paused. We beat the maze.